Telegraph wires chronicle horrific events. I discuss this and more on today's episode. Welcome back to Around the Weird, booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, and it is also Spooktober, so I want to highlight, a short story with a bit of a scary flavor to it, and I think I have a bit of a good one for you today. Today's short story is all about mysterious cities and telegraphs. I am referring to The Night Wire by Henry Ferris Arnold, which was published in 1926 in an issue of the pulp magazine Weird Tales. For those who don't know, Henry Ferris Arnold was an American writer who wrote a little bit of pulp fiction, not that kind of pulp fiction, but scary stories, things in magazines. They only have like a couple of stories to their name, and I don't know too much else about Henry Ferris Arnold. A lot of their sort of story, their personal biography has been lost to time, which happens if you have someone who writes a couple stories but never really elaborates on it. He probably had like a different type of job, like a whole other life beyond writing, but he did like to write. So it's always interesting to kind of explore those types of writers, because it does happen on this channel, especially with writings from the 1800s where people didn't make this their entire life. But without further ado, let's talk about The Night Wire. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Night Wire focuses on Jem. He's kind of recalling a spooky event that happened to him, which is, a frequent thing that happens in stories of this time. People talking about, this awful thing happened to me. I survived, but did others survive? That you see that a lot, especially with Poe's stories and Mary Shelley's stories. But Jim is a telegraph service operator working the night shift, and on busy nights there is a man working alongside him, which tonight is a busy night, and he is working with a man named John. It should be noted that John is acting strangely on this night, suggesting that it might be cold or something, and Jem just says that he doesn't feel that it's cold, and so they begin just doing their work instead. And as the night passes on, he begins getting wires from Chicago, Jem specifically, about a city named Xebico. I believe it's called Xebico. That's how you pronounce it, because it has an Xebico, and it begins detailing strange events that are happening in the city, and he gets more and more each night, which John is responsible for sort of figuring out from the telegraph and writing it down or something like that. And there's a fog that rolls through Xebico, and nobody can really explain it. Someone from the church notes that the fog originated from the church, and there's these shadowy creatures in the fog trying to grab people. They send out a search party, which goes missing, and they send out a second one, and nobody hears from it. And then finally, the person who was sending the telegraphs looks up to the sky once the fog begins to clear and sees horrific colors and flames in the sky and terrifying events. And then the fog people, the lights in the fog, begin coming to him, and that's where the telegraphs begin stopping. They no longer come from Xebico, suggesting a horrifying thing has happened to everyone there. And then Jim wants to know more, so he telegraphs Chicago, and Chicago says that no telegraphs have come from them throughout the entire night because there was nothing on the second wire. No one was working the second wire, which Jim thinks means it might have been a hoax this entire time. And when he tries to tell John, it turns out that John was dead this entire time, ever since he talked with Jim at the beginning of the night. And it suggests that John was maybe like automatically through brain sort of processes that are confusing, relaying stuff from the wire to Jim in a way that might have in fact been nonsense, just sort of creating a fictional story about Xebico, but how he was able to sort of tell an entire real story remains to be seen. But as the story comes to a close, Jim notes that there is no Xebico on any map. And so how this all originated, Jim doesn't know, but he's certain that he's not going to work the night shift anymore. In terms of analysis, there's a fair bit to talk about with the Nightwire. One of the main things that Arnold really touches upon here is Eldritch horror, which is a genre that was really getting its start around this time. You see that with the creatures of the fog being a sentient creature, sort of originating from like a church graveyard of some sort, suggesting a hellish origin of some kind, or a dead origin. So it's assaulting people, and you typically see that with Eldritch horror. Dead people are still running around. I've seen many a Lovecraft story that touches upon that sort of thing, where even though someone is dead, they still manage to communicate something, and you don't find out that they're dead until a little bit later. Bizarre things happening in the sky as well, just seeing colors that don't quite make sense, that don't match up with how reality should be. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. Look up, look up. The whole sky is in flames, colors as yet unseen by man or demon. The flames are moving. They have started to intermix. The colors are rearranging themselves. They are so brilliant that my eyes burn. They are a long way off. And that's really fascinating because of it's something that's not out of place with Lovecraft. It's not out of place with a lot of Eldritch kind of horror stories. And this is like sort of the ground floor of that kind of, people seeing things that no human should ever really see. Is it demonic in nature? The colors are intermixing. The sky is literally looking apocalyptic. And it's not helping that, there's these weird creatures in the fog. And it should be noted, like, Lovecraft was writing around the same time. Like Arnold might have been inspired by Lovecraft, or, Lovecraft might have been inspired by Arnold, because it was said that Lovecraft loved this story. So maybe the same people writing about the same ideas at this time, and kind of building off of each other, or sort of firmly establishing a new genre of horror. I also think, as is typical in these types of stories, you see Jim as an audience stand-in, because Jim is experiencing horror as the audience does. He's powerless to really do anything else. He has to only watch while these telegraphs roll in about the city that he's never heard of before, and hear about these awful, terrifying events as they're unfolding. Literally, the world seems to be ending, at least for the people of Xebico. It's just really fascinating how powerless somebody would be in this type of situation to only be able to witness the horror rather than do anything about it. But that's also an important thing to note, is that he can, in these types of stories, you can't drive the plot forward. And given that at the beginning of the story he said, this is a horrific event that happened to me, again, it's like he's not being a part of the action. He's just an observer. And so with that, there's you kind of lose some of the stakes of the story. Like, if he was more actively involved in what was happening in Xebico or something like that, like maybe you would feel a little bit more terror, a little bit more anxiety. But rather, if you're just able to watch it and do nothing else about it, you lose a certain sort of element to the story, I would say. I will also say, being spooked on the night shift and not wanting to work, it is very relatable, especially in a previous job where I worked graveyard from 11 until 7, and I had to go outside in the dark, and it was really eerie. There's nobody outside at night except people who probably shouldn't be outside at night, and just having to walk around and monitor things and make sure everything's great in that particular job that I was in. I can really relate to how Jem, feels having to experience all of this at night and watching these terrifying events happening. And even, what happened with John in this story. It's like, yeah, I'd rather not work that. I'd rather encounter all of that during the day when it seems normal and there's not this sort of undercurrent of horror attached to it. So I do like that aspect of this story. It's also worth talking about the technology aspect. Other people have sort of offered their criticism of the story and focused on the technology, which is important to talk about here, because the telegraph is the vector of horror in this story. The wires are coming in through the telegraph. People are documenting a story of, a city under siege by the forces of darkness, which is something that might not have been possible, 50 years previously in this story. The telegraph is becoming even more popular, although in a matter of years, the phone would rise up. But you also see that happening with the phone, because you have stories like when a stranger calls, or, just other sort of urban legends around people using the phone to, communicate horror in some sort of way. We've done the same for TV, for cell phones, for movies, for YouTube, for streaming services and things like that. There's one thing humans love to do. It's take a new bit of technology and say, how can we turn this into something that will terrify people? And I do like how Arnold kind of makes use of that technology. I don't think he was maybe the first person to sort of use technology for horror in this way, but he is sort of capturing the horror, the potential horror of the telegraph in a way that is meaningful and really exciting, and gets people enmeshed and enthralled with this story. And I do think one last thing to talk about is the ending and how unusual it is, because the story focuses on Xebico and then it shifts back to the fact that John was dead the whole time. I do think you're trying to mix two elements of like two different horror stories together here in a way that doesn't quite work, but also doesn't really sink the story. Because again, like, it raises the question of what's the deal with Xebico? How was he able to communicate an entire story about a fictional city? Like, is this a message from the great beyond? Is this like a, the proof of an afterlife, or the brain working long after someone is officially dead? There is some good there, but also like you're introducing a new element, and I would have loved to have heard more about Xebico, or have seen more of this fog, like it being sort of like a stinger at the end, where the Jem is now seeing the fog outside and filled with increasing amounts of horror of what might happen to him. But that's me trying to maybe rework the story to be something else, and so it's important to talk about what it is, and of course, mixing those two horror elements together, as I've said, it doesn't quite work out. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Night Wire by Henry Ferris Arnold. A pretty solid short story, one that is perfect for Spooktober, this month of horror. If you want to go read it, I'll put a link to it in the description. I found it on a free source because, of course, this was published in a pulp magazine from 1926, so it's probably in the public domain. If you have any thoughts on this story, or you simply want to note something about my review, let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear from you. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that more people can find out about this short story or this author if they don't already know about them. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and telegraph horror related travels. Farewell.